Mark Andreessen is one of the most influential voices in the tech world, including at the intersection of technology and politics.
Mark Andreessen has helped a lot of people get rich.
The New York Times calls him arguably the chief ideologist of the Silicon Valley elite.
And he's made millions of people's lives more fun, more efficient.
Mr. Andreessen co-founded Netscape, first widely used browser, almost instantly making him a major figure here in Silicon Valley.
He was an early investor in Facebook, Pinterest, LinkedIn, Twitter, Lyft, and more.
Mark is a
Mr.
visionary tech
Andreessen
leader.
launched the venture capital
He's a
fund
famously successful unicorn wrangler. He's the co-creator of the first widely used web browser. And though he hates the industry,
I played guitar all my life. In high school, I played jazz rhythm guitar.
Is it possible to get like a little sneak peek?
Yeah.
Sure. Like
Sure.
an exclusive preview?
Sure, I can play some. Yeah, absolutely.
Computer Freaks friends, we're back in Hawaii with Kevin Hughes as he plays guitar in his one-bedroom apartment.
7,000 miles away, I can hear you breathing.
Kevin was showing my producer Josh and a photographer one of his most prized possessions, his guitar. The last time you heard from Kevin in episode 2, he had turned down Mark Andreessen's offer in 1994 to join him at Netscape. It would sound like that would be the end of Kevin's story. But like the dot-com world at large, he had a tumultuous journey ahead of him. And a guitar is one of the few things that our computer freak has kept through the past 3 decades.
And the people pass by over the bridge. They move across.
Mark Andreessen, you're exceptionally successful by most measures, but what to you is the definition of success?
I think it is contribution. Have you done something that mattered ultimately? The other thing is, I think happiness is either almost a complete myth. People who anchor on happiness seem to go off the rails pretty often.
Did you sell your house at a loss?
I sold everything at a loss.
Okay.
When all was said and done, the only things I had left was my Honda Civic, the first car I had ever purchased after I joined EIT. I had my Martin guitar, I had my Apple laptop, and $1,000 in the bank. After that, I moved into a small room in a married friend's house on Oahu for $500 a month and suffered a psychotic break. At that point, I was living on instant noodles and making websites for $500 each. The IRS proceeded with a full audit, which took years to negotiate, and I was in debt to the state of California for hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was 30 years old.
But how did Kevin get there? Everything was going great for him. He was being courted by Mark Andreessen to be one of the first employees at Netscape. Sure, he missed out on the payday from Netscape's IPO, but there was no shortage of money to be made in tech. Kevin did very well for himself without Andreessen. To make a very long story short, after EIT was acquired by Verifone in 1995, Kevin followed Marty Tannenbaum to a startup called VO Systems, which was then bought by another tech company called Commerce One. There, Kevin was paid an $85,000 a year salary and given what he remembered was more than 200,000 stock options. That stock price started exploding. By February of 2000, Kevin's net worth on his Charles Schwab bank statement from that month was nearly $107 million. It is even displayed at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. This is what his life was like.
At that time, I traveled back and forth between my houses in Palo Alto and Hawaii and began to hold huge parties at both locations and started living the high life. I had all my friends over. I invited all of my relatives in Hawaii over for a tour of the state, including my grandparents. They had no idea what I did or what the web was or what I was doing. So there wasn't much I could explain to any of them about how all of this happened. It was so surreal.
But was there anybody in the room who was like, this is very fast? Or is there any kind of crazy uncle or crazy aunt who was kind of warning you about what lay ahead?
No, actually. None of them really had any idea. When you come across that much wealth when you're young, especially if you could care less about money, it's incredibly hard to know what to do. I was completely confused. And so many men in their later 20s were actually in my exact situation.
Kevin was at a crossroads where he truly could have been one of the tech oligarchs who are household names today. But he was different.
I'm the same age as Elon Musk. We both made our initial fortunes in the same year, in 1999. But I didn't want to start another company or go into space or do anything like that. I ended up starting a private foundation to help foster the arts, culture, and technology in Hawaii. And I did some great things in that area that, above everything, I'm probably most proud of.
But then this happened. Much of the path that Kevin's life took next really boiled down to economics. Let's take you back to the late 1990s, when many of the tech names we know today established themselves. Jeff Bezos, Mark Andreessen, and even the Google founders to some extent. Tech companies were taking off in an unimaginable way at that time because the World Wide Web was so new and money to fund tech startups was, as Marty had said before, cheap and free-flowing from venture capitalists. But when the Fed raised interest rates and the cheap money dried up, the entire tech economy suffered a slow, painful burn. People more experienced with economic downturns knew how to protect their money. But other people like Kevin did not. And he kept spending even after the dot-com crash was underway.
Technology stocks got trounced on the day of...
Shares of the internet appliance provider got hammered today, losing over 10 points.
The company announced today it's laying off 518 people.
After what they are already calling Black Friday, they are counting up the damage on Wall Street. It was the worst single-day point loss ever for both exchanges.
Well, as the stock was really crashing, I was kind of oblivious. In mid-2001, I remember walking into a BMW dealership in Palo Alto, which was by Fry's Electronics, and across the street from Griffin Stringed Instruments, where I bought my first guitar. I walked into the BMW dealership and bought a brand new white SLK for $33,000 in cash, and it took about 15 minutes walking in and out the door. But later in 2001 is when I began to panic. All of my stocks had begun falling in 2000, but I had so much, I just didn't think anything of it. And by 2001, things were worth 50 million, then 30 million, then 10 million. I got calls from Morgan Stanley Dean Witter telling me I had to begin selling my Commerce One shares. So they attempted to begin to do that, but they told me that the shares were restricted at that point and I could not sell them. And there was nothing that they could do about it.
There are many people we've talked to this season who have similar stories like Kevin. When the dot-com bubble burst and the market crashed, the rising tide that lifted all tech companies drowned all but a handful. In the basest of terms, there were winners and there were losers. In reality, we could call the winners people like Mark Andreessen, aka the godfather of Silicon Valley, and Google's founders. But Kevin's story reflects the paths of more of the early web pioneers we have met this season on Computer Freaks. And I wouldn't call their stories pure losses. there's a lot more going on than that. They were all battling for the right alibis within their companies and the industry. And then, of course, they were all battling life. We're going to get into all of their stories in this final episode. This is Computer Freaks from Inc. I'm Christine Hani Dare-Bryan. Chapter 6, Briefly Famous. So the first lesson I've learned from reporting on winners and losers from the 1990s seems to come down to having the right advocates. And this didn't just hold true at EIT. It was also a problem at Netscape. But let's catch you up on what happened there since we left off in episode 3. Netscape had experienced one of the most memorable IPOs in history. Marc Andreessen was one of the biggest new names in Silicon Valley and becoming as well known as his role model, Bill Gates. But then his hero turned on him. Here is how Roseanne Sino remembers Marc's view of Bill.
He was constantly talking about Microsoft and the threat from Microsoft. He had seen it enough in the Valley, how if a good idea came up, Microsoft would try to kill it. So we were not the first that was going to be worrying about that as a software company or as a non-hardware company, I'll put it that way. So he was constantly saying, we've got to watch this. That's why we have to grow fast. That's why we have to get market share. Because if we hesitated at all, Microsoft would swoop in with their might and take basically the idea and reverse engineer it and push it out. So that was always lurking in the background. And sure enough, at the Windows 95 Developers Conference, we were part of the people invited to that. It was on the campus at Microsoft, where all software developers developing something that would run on Windows were going to be there. I sent one of my folks from my team, went with the engineers up there to give a demo of Netscape's products at the time. And my employee, Chris, called me and said, "Oh, you're not going to believe who's standing at our booth and won't leave." And it was Bill Gates. And he stood there and he just watched the demo and watched the demo and watched the demo. And we knew it. And that was pretty much it.
Microsoft clearly wanted to regain browser market share. And that's when Netscape found itself in trouble, as Roseanne remembers.
We knew that pretty soon there'd be a browser coming out from Microsoft that looked a lot like ours, that would basically probably be bundled with their, and sure enough, that's what happened. The bundling of Internet Explorer and then the subsequent decline in our market share because, oh boy, a lot of those hardware companies suddenly couldn't buy from us anymore. Couldn't say why exactly, but the implication was pretty clear that they weren't going to get their operating system if they bought from us. All of a sudden, that was where we could see our market share was falling. We did end up contacting the Justice Department. The lawsuit happened. And that ended up taking quite a lot of the time and energy from a portion of my team, certainly of our general counsel's in time. But we had to do it.
Firefox grew out of this, but that clearly was not going to be enough to save the company. On November 24th, 1998, AOL bought Netscape for $4.2 billion. But that deal ultimately soared to $10 billion because of the rise of AOL's stock price. Yes, that number is staggering even today. But Roseanne does not look back on that deal as fondly as you would think.
So you're 30 and all of a sudden you're a multimillionaire?
On paper.
Roseanne explained that stock ownership was far more complicated than that.
People, again, I don't even know how to explain this correctly, but basically how the rich get richer, because they knew how to then, certainly I watched this with some of the top folks in our executive team who'd been around the block a few times. They leveraged getting into friends and family on Yahoo and this one and that one. And all of a sudden it's like, the money is just going and going and going. For the rest of us, it was about Netscape and making it succeed. That was going to be our ticket to doing well. But I recognize that wasn't necessarily the goal of everybody involved. Let's just put it that way.
But there were some Netscape employees who felt really well cared for, like Mark's fellow programmer that he and Jim Clark brought over from NCSA, Alex Todich.
I love Jim too. He just treated us well. So basically, when he hired us, he gave each one of us an equal percentage of the new company. I mean, he treated us well in every respect. He gave us a fair salary, but he basically said, look, write me a check for like $50 and I'm going to give you a share of this company. Like, don't talk to me about what this means, but just trust me. And so he basically gave us a good chunk of Netscape or whatever. So to start off with, and he was equitable. He just said, I like my engineers. We're going to take good care of you. And then once we went public, he said, okay, now you guys go talk to this accountant guy and he's just going to take care of you so you don't do anything stupid. He just made sure, he's like, I know what you guys need. And here it is. You go talk to these people and they're the right guys. Here is the guy I've been working with for 20 years. Go talk to him. You'll get your lawyer, investment advisor, the whole package.
I wish he'd taken care of me, but he didn't. So, I have to, he took care of me in other ways, but not that way. I do appreciate that he did that for the engineering team because they were young guys and they didn't know. And, again, it was a crazy thing to go from being basically have nothing to all of a sudden you've got all this stock that's worth a ton of money. What do you do with that? And how do you manage it? So, yeah, Jim was really good to the engineering crew. I think he was good to all of us on the founding team in a certain way, but his orientation was toward the engineers.
But the way Roseanne was treated definitely colored what happened next for her.
My experience at Netscape totally changed the trajectory of my life. I decided I had made enough money, certainly, to not have to work for a while, which was great. I decided I wanted to go back and get a PhD. I was very concerned about the way I saw things develop at the company, but also with the other companies around us. This sort of idea that just because we can build it, we do, as opposed to thinking through implications of technology and thinking about what kind of world we were creating. Those discussions had never happened really at Netscape. What was this we were unleashing on the world?
It also had a huge spiritual impact on Roseanne.
I'm actually in a theological program right now. I'm really focusing on ecological theology. I get really, again, concerned about the lack of concern about the earth, what we were doing for each other, for the earth, the impact of these things that we do and create on well-being writ large for the planet. So that's where I've gone, is really to think more about that direction and how to get more people to think about, I guess, to get out of ourselves, to think less about, am I wealthy? Am I doing well? And to think about, what am I doing for the world? What am I doing for the planet? My experience in Silicon Valley really spurred a lot of that.
But as Mark Andreessen has become more powerful than ever with his wealth and ties to the Trump administration, he arguably has won. And because of that, Roseanne definitely has regrets about how she worked with him.
You made him a star. You single-handedly made him a star. How do you feel looking back on that today?
I feel very mixed about it. I liked him at the time. I thought he was smart. I liked that we were doing something exciting, and I thought that could be very beneficial in many ways for the world. I think looking at it now and knowing how he thinks, or at least from what I can tell, I have become rather disgusted with my role in the whole thing. I just think that some of these guys who are very smart think they're smarter than they are, if that makes any sense. He was very smart at technology. I don't think he's very socially smart. I don't think he is broad-minded in the sense of what could be, what he could actually contribute to the world. And I think that's what upsets me, is it still comes down to, we won, and kind of the bro culture sense of like who got the most toys in the end of it. And I don't feel good about that.
As an aside, since Mark Andreessen would not speak to us for this podcast, I want to take a moment to include a voice of someone who does defend him, and it's not who you would expect.
So I will go on record. Andreessen was an ignorant idiot at 22, and he's not now. He's a very smart, experienced, well-informed, good instinct, strategic thinker now. He may be public enemy number one or a Trump lover or whatever, but he's no longer stupid. He's learned a lot. So there you go.
It's Alan Schiffman. After he left EIT, he started 2 other companies which did well enough. Alan says that he's getting by Silicon Valley standards, but to the rest of the world, he is well off. Of course, not as well off as Mark Andreessen.
I don't know that people do change, but they do learn. I think that what happens to people is they think they're smart about something, and then somewhere along the way, they get clued in that they're not smart about it after all. They get smart about it, or they stop leaning into, pushing that part of themselves, that weak part of themselves forward, right? I think a lot of people figure that out as they get older. And so maybe they're not changing their personality, but they put different parts of their personality forward, and they pull back other parts of their personality because they learn what works and what doesn't, in the sense of what they get rewarded for, what makes them happy and what makes them sad. And not everybody does that. Lots of people continue to do stuff that makes them sad. But I mean, that's the sense in which people grow. They have a lot of different parts of themselves, and they learn which ones you need to push back. So yeah, Andreessen had lots of parts of his personality that he should regret when he was 22. Well, so did I.
But back to this point of winners and losers. There has definitely been talk about how they're defined by their charitable giving. In recent months, Mark has gone on several podcasts talking about the concept of the deal, that you can be a winner if you create whatever type of tech company that you want and repay society with charitable giving. But Mark has argued that unspoken agreement has been broken and tech moguls are still being criticized and frankly not being treated like winners. As Roseanne remembers it, Mark was never that generous to begin with. When Roseanne was working for Netscape, she recalls fundraising for a medical charity and asking Netscape employees to chip in. Some workers gave generously.
Mark wouldn't kick in a dime, not a dime, not a dime. And the same was true of a number of other folks. It was surprising who would give the money and who wouldn't give anything. I think that's what kind of got me really seeing the difference in orientation to wealth. That growing up the way I did and the way a lot of the folks did there, service and giving back was a huge thing. But for other folks, it was like, oh, no, that's ridiculous. So, or it was just not on the radar. I shouldn't even say it was ridiculous. I just don't think it was on the radar screen. So that was a really telling thing for me. We raised a good amount of money. I'm not complaining. I don't think CARE would be complaining. But at the same time, I was shocked that so many people just didn't think it was important to do.
I've also talked to friends of Mark Andreessen who say he has been generous to them in other ways, like his former colleague Alex Todich, who saw how much Mark invested in their work.
I kind of used to sort people into like how smart they are. And there were very few people who were like obviously way smarter than I was. There's about 10 of them that I've worked with in my life. And Mark was one of them. So I appreciated that. When I worked with him, it was amazing. I mean, the project would not have happened the way it did without him. Not only did he have the technical chops, and I mean, he was truly obsessive.
And Alex still defends Mark as a winner to his family today, even if some of his relatives may not agree with Andreessen politically.
I was just talking to my son about it because when Mark endorsed Trump, he was like, yo, your old friend, whatever. The guy you used to work with endorsed Trump, he's an idiot. And I was like, no, he's not an idiot. He's way smarter than me. But I remembered when we were talking a long time ago, when we were still at NTSA, and we talked about that. We didn't talk politics. Oh, my God, we did talk about politics, but it was more about academic politics. I remember when we talked about the government and Marx believed, I remember this talk with him because I come from a socialist country. I come from Yugoslavia. So I thought government is a good thing. And Marx's view was like that basically government is bad. It was, now I recognize it as the libertarian view. But I had no idea what libertarians was at this time. And I remember talking to him and I was like, but surely there must be some good that government can do. And his view was like, no. I thought that was really odd because, as a socialist, I believed, government is all good. Of course, I was completely wrong and he's wrong. He was wrong too, but, the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Maybe, as Alex said, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Roseanne's view is very different from Alan or Alex. After the break, we're going to hear from more of the people you've come to know in this series, where they've landed and what they've learned.
History is written by the winners.
Part of this idea of winners and losers is what we see from the outside, looking into the tech world. Marty Tannenbaum knows this better than most. We see tech moguls when they're on the cover of magazines, ringing a bell at the NASDAQ, or standing on the dais of the recent inauguration. We see them on our iPhones and our iPads and our televisions getting credit for inventing transformative technologies. But as Marty remembers, that marker of success was fleeting.
I don't pay any attention to credit. If I wanted credit, I would have. I was briefly famous for a while, and that was thanks to Alan Schiffman, who said, remember I said time to get rich? He also said time to get famous. And we hired a PR agency. And I realized that for a mere matter of money, you could get places like Inc. to put you on the cover. And we were, a Fortune cool company.
Were you on the cover of Inc.?
No.
Okay.
But using it as a metaphor.
Right.
I had a whole page article in the Wall Street Journal on one of the companies I started. I had my 15 minutes of fame, but it never really meant much.
He was content with the life he created for himself already.
I owned 2% of Commerce One at its peak. And the feeling of having, a good part of $1 billion was a very interesting feeling. It was a brief, fleeting feeling. I didn't change. This house I've lived in for 40 years. And I bought it when I was working at SRI still and never saw a need to move. I like it here. But you try to think about what it means to be, and this, you could say Kevin might be even more like this. Unfortunately, many of the people I worked with, it ruined their lives because they got rich. My values were set. I was middle-aged. I didn't even start EIT till I was almost 50. Because when I was young, you couldn't start companies.
But behind this time, when Marty was experiencing great wealth and brief fame, Marty said this is what his life was really like.
In the middle of all of this, going public, I get diagnosed with melanoma metastatic to liver and given 9 months to live.
He was struggling with cancer.
And so I don't tell anyone at Commerce One or the public because I'm a wounded duck and we're in the middle of going public and so forth. Probably this was because of the stress and pressure of going public, but I had to deal with all of that. And it was, a very trying time, but ultimately I got enough out of Commerce One to be able to start a number of other companies in the cancer space. And that's what I do today. I'm trying to give back to the world.
But the more time I have spent with my Computer Freaks friends from this season, I have learned that many of them are too busy dealing with much bigger problems than to reflect on who they think may be winners and losers. When me and my producer Josh visited Pasadena last spring, there were plenty of references to wildfires in the past. As you remember, Tom Solanil's house had burned in a fire in 1993. But earlier this year, the California wildfires engulfed the communities that the early founders of Hot Hot Hot's website lived and worked in. Tom actually stayed in his current home through the wildfires and survived. Most of my recent email conversations I've had with him have been about survival and dealing with the aftermath of what the fires brought. Monica and Perry kept their home as well. But in Monica's job, she is tasked with helping 10,000 out of the 14,000 students in the Pasadena School District whose homes were affected by the fires essentially start their lives over. 70% of the students she works with already qualified for free and reduced lunch before the fires. Their priorities and perspectives are in a completely different stratosphere. They're not thinking about whether their e-commerce dreams should have put them in the same realm as Jeff Bezos. People like Monica are just trying to figure out how to feed and get books to children. But for our other subjects like Kate Burns, who you heard from last episode and was Google's early employee, there's plenty to learn from about how money was distributed from early deals, particularly Google's IPO in 2004. Like with Netscape, the spoils were not shared evenly.
I've just come from a reunion of European Google founders. We haven't seen each other for like 20 years. We were treated very, very differently outside of the US. And we recognized that whilst we were at Google, looking at the share allocations, the differences were just beyond enormous. If I was based in New York, I wouldn't be working right now at Google. So my colleagues at the same level as me were given probably 100 times more shares than I was. Like an enormous difference, like night and day difference. And we raised it. There was a bit of an uprising by the Europeans and the European leadership. And there was kind of like this kind of shrugging of the shoulders from US and HQ, where they're kind of like, well, we didn't really think that it was important for international. And unfortunately, what came with that was an incorrect, and especially with respect to me, there's kind of this why is she still working? Oh my God, you should be like on an island somewhere or on a boat or, there is this kind of very kind of incorrect conclusion that anyone that worked at Google in the early days in Europe would be retired. But it was the exact opposite. We of course, we did okay, but we're lucky if we walked away with maybe $1 million, maybe $1 billion too. And even then, the tax man would take 50% of that.
Kate left Google in 2008 and has gone on to do more and more interesting things in tech and media since then, from running AOL Europe to then BuzzFeed Europe to starting her own business. But there was still a sour taste in her mouth from how things ended with Google.
I was absolutely burnt out. And I had 2 kids in the space of running a huge region, 2 kids, one after another. And I went back to work after 6 weeks of having Josie. So it's crazy. And I negotiated with Susan, the great maternity package, which back then I increased from 3 months to 6 months. And then I didn't even take it. I was just I think I was paranoid. I had to get back to work in case someone took my job or decisions were being made that I wasn't aware of. And then we acquired YouTube in 2006, 2007. I was on the acquisition team. I think it was kind of like constructive dismissal looking back on it. But again, I wasn't aware of HR legal shit then. But they offered me a big job in New York to run YouTube. And I was pregnant with my son. And I was like, what? How is this going to work? And my husband, has his own business. And I was like, he's not going to move. We're not going to move to maybe California, but he's not going to move to New York. And if he did, what's he going to do? He's going to sit in an apartment with a newborn baby with me, another one on the way. And it was kind of I think that was a bit of let's just see. She's going to say no. So then we'll just push her out. It was my decision to leave, but I did look back on it and think, oh, that was quite crafty. And I was also told to hire a bunch of middle-aged white guys on higher salaries than me. And that was really, I was like, the politics here is getting beyond a joke. So it wasn't the kind of cutesy, fluffy, rose-colored spectacle place that I joined. It was starting to get quite dark and messy.
But it doesn't feel like Kate has lost anything by not being at Google anymore. After spending the past 18 months reporting on the internet entrepreneurs of the 1990s, I don't come away envying anyone who has to navigate Silicon Valley now.
I used to go to Mountain View a lot, obviously, and I've been back to San Francisco maybe annually, and it's a very dark place. It's a very, very dark place indeed. It was dark 20 years ago, but it's parts of San Francisco are really quite shocking. Silicon Valley has a lot to do with that, obviously. The polarization of wealth and poverty is just cavernous. So I kind of goes through, for me, I still have a lot of friends out there. We have a lot of conversations around the economic climate, and it's been interesting to see what happens now with Trump. But even maybe 6 months ago, there was this kind of indiscriminate investing again, which always makes me feel really scared when individuals have made so much money that they're just pouring it into anywhere they possibly can.
Like in season 1, our European counterparts did get shut out of some of the credit, and this time in the 1990s, the great wealth that was created. But Nick Hines, our friend who launched GoTo.com in Europe around the same time Kate Burns was at Google, says he doesn't regret that time. He's kind of like our computer freaks in season 1 who were just thrilled to be part of something exciting.
I didn't work with people that were driven by personal greed. Nearly everybody I worked with were going to make a lot of money already because they joined before the float. They all were sitting on a stock value, which was going to make them personally a lot of money anyway. And they could have left, and some of them did. But most of them stayed because they loved what they did and they liked working with the people they're with and they believed in the proposition. And being a pioneer is a way of life. It's not really a choice. It was great to be a pioneer and to be proud of our brand and our company and what we were achieving and the innovation and the creating of a new market space.
That's a sentiment that Kevin Hughes seems to share too, despite losing nearly everything. Since the crash of the early 2000s, Kevin started an interactive ad space company that was bought by an Indian-based tech company in 2011. He is now retired and lives on the island of Oahu, surrounded by red hibiscus and yellow bird of paradise. It's a modest life compared to his time during the early 2000s, but Hughes says he is happy to be where he is. He still sees glimpses of his contributions sprinkled through the internet, like the icons he created for the Apache web server, which powers a major part of the web. For Kevin, that's enough, because that's who he really is.
Be true to yourself. I met so many millionaires and people that went on to become billionaires. And later on, I would read news stories about them getting into lawsuits, going through gigantic divorces, building mansions, all sorts of things, being very vocal with very divisive opinions. It seems that over time, when you live in this world, it was easy to see people change a bit and get caught up in things that brought them far from where they started. And I made it a point to just not think that way. So by the time I moved into the small room in my friend's house after all this in Oahu, I just kept on doing what I knew how to do the best way I could. And I remember a friend commenting to me about this. He said, "I can't believe you just went through all of that, but you're still you. You haven't really changed." And I thought that was really nice of him to say that. It keeps you sane.
Like Roseanne, Kevin also wishes that the creators of the internet we all use today had put more thought into their design.
So if you ever feel stress when you're using the web or anything designed by people, then that's because it was not designed with enough empathy. And that's something I've always tried to retain. And I believe that's what we need way more of these days.
It's been a transformative journey this season, meeting these tech pioneers from the 1990s. At the same time that I've been saying goodbye to and deeply grieving my dad. While Major Joseph Hawley and Kevin Hughes may be wildly different people, in the end, like Kevin, my dad's life was pared down to his single room where he stayed while in hospice. The same room where we met my dad in the start of season 1. It was still filled with photos of my dad and my mom. It had a few books. But ultimately, after my dad lived a busy, crowded life as an early creator of the ARPANET, there were very few possessions he really needed. In the end, when my dad was in hospice, he listened to the first season of Computer Freaks. And found comfort hearing these voices from his past. But in his final days and hours, he didn't want to dwell on his early contributions to the ARPANET. He wanted to talk about his grandchildren. He wanted to hear about my daughter Elizabeth's 6th birthday party and how feral her little kindergarten friends were. He empathized with how much my husband Tom was struggling to assemble our daughter's plastic monstrosity of a Barbie dream house. Her latest obsession, which very briefly eclipsed her love for the dollhouse my dad first built for me. And in his final hours, he couldn't really speak, but he listened to me, and when I sought his empathy about the exhausting and challenging path of parenthood Tom and I are going through, he released to me this final, labored, guttural sigh. I am partly relieved that my dad is not seeing the world we live in today. I don't think he would be comfortable with the evolution of the ARPANET, which was intended to be used for the good of the defense community and academia, not to be such a great source of wealth creation and division. My dad did not leave this world thinking of himself as a god or dreaming of being a tech oligarch. He made peace with his contributions, and then he bid it goodbye. There was nothing more transformative to witness than that. So as I look back at this season and the pioneers of browsers and e-commerce and search, I only wish them a pinch of the peace that my dad left this world with. Because my new definition of winners and losers after witnessing my father's passing has completely changed. What makes Marc Andreessen a winner and Kevin Hughes not? What makes the Google founders winners and Bill Gross not? Monica and Perry Lopez have not followed the same path in life as Jeff Bezos, but they have a lot of love in their lives and they're doing incredibly important work rebuilding a community. There are definitely people from this season I would rather share grapes and a crusty baguette with, and it's certainly not the people that society often calls the winners. The pioneers of the internet from the 1990s have been all dealt such different hands. As people said, the truth of who is a winner and who is a loser lies somewhere in the middle.
Hello. Hi, Daddy. It's Christine. What I wanted to ask you about is looking back on all your work and everything you've done. When you look back in your life, what do you want to be most remembered for?
I guess developing the network initially. I thought that it would never grow the way it did. It just kept on growing. I think that in ways it was good and some of it was bad. But that was part of the growth. People used it for what they thought it was best used for.
I think you built something really great, Daddy.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Computer Freaks is created and hosted by myself, Christine Hani Dare-Bryan. Our executive producer and editor is Josh Christensen. Producers are Miriam Kiparuidze and Taka Zen. Production support from Blake Odom, Matt Toder, and Avery Miles. Music by James Jackman. Sound design and mixing by Nicholas Torres. Special thanks to Stephanie Mehta, Mike Hoffman, and Michelle Lakegrove. And I dedicate Computer Freaks Season 2 to my dad, Major Joseph Hani.